When I look back over my life, I used to think that in 1954, when I did my first 3 months in the Australian Navy in boot camp, was the hardest thing I'd ever experienced. And at that time, it may well have been. But it paled into insignificance to that first 10-day Vipassana retreat done in the Blue Mountains in 1986. Because in boot camp, the discipline came from outside. But in a meditation centre, the discipline is self-imposed. And it was tough. But at the end of that course, and I did 14 similar type of courses over the next 15 years or so, the Vipassana head teacher, the late Mr. S.N. Goenka, or Goenka-ji as he was called, made a pronouncement which I hadn't heard before up until that time. I hadn't heard it before. He said, once you start to seek who you truly are, the whole universe conspires to help you on your way. Now, I've heard that many times since, reading various books by various people, and I would assume that it is true. And even back in the Bible it says somewhere, seek you first the kingdom of heaven. Where does the kingdom of heaven lie? It lies within. So there we have it, something coming down from millennia, telling us that once we start to look within, to find out what and who we truly are, a genuine search, a really heartfelt search, not something half-hearted that I might do one day, but once you start with that question, who am I, what am I, and start to work towards it, the whole universe conspires to help you. And it does so in so many ways. You can pick up a book. You can read a newspaper headline. You can see something written on a billboard. All sorts of directions. And if you're very quiet, that still voice within you will give you the advice you need to keep you on your way towards finding out who you are. I had a very unusual incident happen to me. It was back in 1972. I was living in New Zealand, and at that time I'd been reading a lot of books about spirituality and that sort of thing. Obviously I'd already turned the corner and was on my way. I'm walking along the road one day in the shopping centre, close by to where I lived, and I suddenly felt this impulse to go into this bookshop. I didn't question it. I turned and went into the bookshop. It was a fairly small place. One man sitting there reading a newspaper, obviously the proprietor. But I didn't look at him. It was almost as though I was an automaton, that I was walked. And I walked through that bookshop to the back of it. And when I hit the back wall, I turned right. Found myself in a narrow corridor. I walked along that, not deliberately, not consciously. It was almost as though I was being walked. I came to another wall and I turned left again. And by this time I was at the front of the shop. Now the front of the shop with its glass window was all covered up with newspapers. And this little spot, this little place between the front window glass and the back shelves, or the first shelves, was a row of books. There were books upon books, about 4 or 5 different levels. But I found myself crouching down on my hands and knees. It was almost dark in there. I couldn't see what I was getting. Couldn't see the book I was pulling out. I pulled out this little book, tiny little book, and I brought it back to the proprietor. And I said, "How much is this?" And he looked at me and he said, "For you, son, 5 cents. Well, when I went to that shop, I had a wallet, but I knew there was no money in it. But maybe. So I opened it up and searched here and there, and sure enough, tucked down in one corner was 5 cents. I gave him the 5 cents and I came out with that book in my hand. I hadn't even been able to open it or look at it, see what it was about, the cover or anything. It was a little book printed in 1924 in Chicago in America. And it was a copy of a very old book, the Hindu book called the Bhagavad Gita, however you pronounce it. I still have that little book with me, and it's filled with wisdom. It was just what I needed at the time. So here's another example of how the universe conspires to help us once we open up our hearts to finding out the truth of what we really are. I'm talking about what we are, not looking at somebody else's life, not looking at some holy man or saint, but looking at our own lives. This is what we are inner directed to do. Find ourselves, evolve as human beings. And when we do that, the whole universe conspires to help us on our way.